Let's talk about Whoopi Goldberg, because I don't think Whoopi Goldberg made these comments on The View to offend anybody. She was simply stating her opinion, her perspective, based on her experiences as an African American in this country. And I think she saw the light, but dimly. She's 100% correct that ultimately the Holocaust was about man's inhumanity to man. And she's being dogged for that. But she's wrong in thinking that you can't have racism within a race. More specifically, racism amongst whites, against whites. But I'll tell you what I think really happened. I think that ABC threw her under the bus because she inadvertently, by making the statement she did, she inadvertently destroyed this narrative of race and white supremacy by saying that the Holocaust was more about man's inhumanity to man. But these comments were said in the larger context, this discussion. So I got to give the ladies on The View credit here. She made these statements in the larger context of this discussion about these two books being banned in this Tennessee school district. To Kill a Mockingbird, which I read growing up in high school in the South, and this novel Mouse. Now, I've never read Mouse, but the big to-do about Mouse is it contains a lot of profanity and nudity. And you can have that discussion about whether or not it's appropriate for a certain age group to be reading that material in school. But look what they said about Catcher in the Rye. And Catcher in the Rye talks about smoking, cross-dressing. What about Alice in Wonderland or Lord of the Flies? Now, the big controversy over Alice in Wonderland is that people believe that that book is about psychedelics. Or taking some type of acid trip. That's not the case. That book is all about illogic and the hypocrisy of Victorian society. The absurdity of it all. That's what that novel, Alice in Wonderland, is all about. I love that scene where they've got the caterpillar smoking out of the hookah. And he goes, "Who," with the smoke, "who are you?" I hope they don't get rid of that movie. That's a great movie. And I talk about all the time on this channel, not censoring things we disagree with. And if you clicked on this channel, this video for the first time, you probably saw Cultural Confederacy and you thought to yourself, he's going to talk about white supremacy. He's probably a KKK member. He probably owns a Confederate battle flag. Well, yes, I do own a Confederate battle flag, but I also have a Bonnie Blue flag and a Betsy Ross flag. I love this country. And no, I'm not a white supremacist. And no, I don't belong to the KKK. The reason I chose the name, if you're new to this thing we call the Cultural Confederacy, the reason I chose the name Cultural Confederacy as it's a rallying cry against censorship. That's what it is. So what I want to do in this video is go to CNN, the New York Post, USA Today, because this story with Whoopi Goldberg, it's ripe for the picking. Where do you start? Now, I've seen this thrown all over the political spectrum, that Adolf Hitler made these statements about the Jewish people, that they were an inferior race. Well, the truth is that in Europe, unlike here, in Europe, they view race differently. They view race in terms of culture. And this was especially true just before and during World War II. Hitler was after this Nordic ideal. He wanted a pure German culture. But he was a dictator. He wanted to have his cake and eat it too. So he's chasing this dream, this utopia that's never going to exist, and he's getting rid of anybody who gets in his way. And there's no question that the Jews were a main target under the Hitler regime. the Third Reich. But in reality, just looking at the numbers, they made up a very small percentage of the amount of people who were killed in concentration camps, such as Auschwitz, because the vast majority of people who were killed under the Third Reich were actually of Central or Eastern European descent. Hitler was very suspicious of Eastern Europeans. He took out Jehovah's Witnesses, clergymen, the handicapped, fellow Germans, ethnic Polish, on top of the Jews. These are all the groups that he killed. Serbians, the Slavs, the Czechs, Romanian gypsies. They all perished under the Hitler regime. And nobody talks about Stalin. Who did more? That's the Russian famine that took place between 1932 and 1933. During that famine, the Soviet famine, under the Stalinistic policies, you had 5, 6, 7 million. I think the estimate is about 8 million people died or wiped out in the Ukraine alone because of the policies of Joseph Stalin. Another example of man's inhumanity to man. Now, you may have not seen this story, but it's out there. You need to go check this out. The son of the dictator in Equatorial Ghana has squandered 116 million of that government's money to buy fast cars and luxury homes while the people in that country are starving. Does that not sound eerily familiar to what happened just before the French Revolution? Man's inhumanity to man. So let's go to CNN. It says here, The View host, Whoopi Goldberg, suspended for 2 weeks over her comments that the Holocaust was, quote, not about race. But CNN uses the phrase falsely declares that the Holocaust was not about race. Well, no, she did not falsely declare anything, CNN. She was stating her opinion. I thought you believed in free speech. You people at CNN, in the mainstream media, you all rally around free speech. You were defending these protesters that were looting, rioting, and burning down the cities, weren't you? ABC News President Kim Godwin, Godwin, described Goldberg's comments as wrong and hurtful. And while Whoopi has apologized, I've asked her to take time to reflect and learn about the impact of her comments. In other words, Whoopi Goldberg destroyed the narrative. And you can't have that. You've got to keep this narrative about racism and white supremacy, or that racism and white supremacy are the only type of racism and white supremacy that exists. If we get the words out tonight, I'll be just fine. Quote, the entire ABC News organization stands in solidarity with our Jewish colleagues, friends, family, and communities. Well, you should be standing with any group that has been oppressed. White, black, Hispanic, Asian, LGBTQ. You should be standing in solidarity with any group out there that's been oppressed. How about with the people who are starving in Equatorial Ghana? Because the son of this dictator in that country is spending 116 million of that country's money on fast cars and luxury homes while the people are starving. So Kim Godwin sends this internal memo to the staff at ABC. She says, quote, decisions over disciplinary matters are never easy. But words matter, and we must be cognizant of the impact our words have. Really, Miss Godwin? Like these protesters from BLM and Antifa shouting pigs in a blanket, fry them up like bacon during all these protests in Seattle, Portland, New York, Atlanta, Austin, you name it. And AOC has come out in support of Whoopi Goldberg. This is according to the New York Post. It says here, AOC says Whoopi Goldberg's suspension over Holocaust flap was unnecessary, and I agree with that. Whoopi Goldberg should not be suspended for speaking her mind, stating her opinion. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or is it Ocasio, said ABC's suspension of Whoopi Goldberg over her comments about the Holocaust wasn't necessary, arguing that Goldberg had already been forgiven by a key Jewish organization. Ocasio-Cortez, I got it right, Ocasio-Cortez noted that the head of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, Greenblatt, accepted her apology. I think wherever there's a learning moment like this, what's super important is the relationship between that person and the community they're making amends with, the New York Congresswoman told TMZ. Greenblatt appeared on The View on Tuesday after Goldberg came under fire for saying that the Holocaust wasn't about race during the show's Monday broadcast. The ADL head told Goldberg and her co-host on Tuesday that the Holocaust was a, quote, singular catastrophe that was motivated by a racialized anti-Semitism. As I just mentioned, it really had more to do with culture, seeing the Jewish people as an inferior culture. And how do you define race anyways? Is it culture? Is it ethnicity? Is it skin color? When we really think about it, we really haven't defined race. But in Europe, they see race as being equivalent to culture. The Jewish people were seen as having an inferior, or being an inferior culture. Greenblatt also tweeted that Goldberg was, quote, longtime ally of the Jewish community and that her apology is very much welcome. Ocasio-Cortez told TMZ that forgiveness from Greenblatt should suffice. I think we really kind of take the Jewish community's lead on this, and they seem to be, or seem to see her apology as authentic and want us to move on. Goldberg first argued that the Holocaust went beyond race during a discussion on The View about a Tennessee school district's decision to ban Maus, the Pulitzer Prize-winning graphic novel about a Holocaust survivor. So this is at the New York Post. AOC has come out in defense of Whoopi Goldberg, rightfully so. Now let's go to Whoopi Goldberg's comments, or these statements that she made after she released a statement before she went on Steve Colbert's show, then she released another statement after she was on that show. So this is the first statement she released. It says, on today's show, I said the Holocaust is not about race, but about man's inhumanity to man. She's 100% correct on that. I should have said it's about both, as Jonathan Greenblatt from the Anti-Defamation League shared. But more times than not, you go back, you check the history, it has to deal with ethnic and cultural differences. These rifts that have been going on for a long time, in some cases centuries. Here's the second statement. The Holocaust was about the Nazis' systematic annihilation of the Jewish people, who they deemed to be an inferior race. I stand corrected. And again, the view in Europe is that your race is your culture. They saw the Jewish people, or Hitler saw the Jewish people, as an inferior culture that was tainting this pure German culture that Hitler was trying to obtain. So those are the two statements from Whoopi Goldberg. And I'll end with this exchange that was on The View. But let me go to USA Today, because this is by Jonathan Greenblatt, head of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. And he said this, why I forgave Whoopi Goldberg on national TV a day after her remarks on the Holocaust. Whoopi Goldberg, pronunciation here, recognized her comments had caused hurt, acknowledged she was wrong, and showed true remorse and introspection. She got thrown under the bus by ABC. For those of us who remain deeply concerned about the increasing trends of trivialization and outright denial of the Holocaust in our society, this has been a week for the record books. First, we learned that a school district in Tennessee has effectively banned the Pulitzer Prize-winning graphic novel Maus, but they also banned To Kill a Mockingbird because people were uncomfortable. You take down the Confederate battle flag, you topple monuments, melt things down, burn books, ban books. How are you supposed to learn anything from history? So you don't repeat the same mistake that other people made before you. Either all stays up or all comes down. So he was talking about this book that was banned by this Tennessee school district, Mouse, which tells the story of artist Art Spiegelman's, I believe that's, or Spiegelman's family history during the Holocaust. The district cited its unnecessary use of profanity and nudity and its depiction of violence and suicide as reasons for removing it from the middle school curriculum. This baffling decision to remove the book from this curriculum, an illustrated book that uses cats and mice to portray the perpetrators and victims of the Holocaust, was the only latest slight in a year where numerous politicians and pundits repeatedly and dishonestly compared mask mandates and COVID-19 vaccines to the Nazis' actions during World War II. Well, they weren't necessarily, these people who are against these mask mandates weren't comparing having to wear a mask to the Holocaust. They were talking about these policies that were being passed by Hitler and people like Stalin. You will do what we say or else. That's what they were talking about. That's what they're railing against. They're not trying to compare having to wear a mask to the Holocaust. It says here, racial laws behind Nazi genocide. And the irony wasn't lost on anyone that the Tennessee decision came on the same day as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I didn't know we had a International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I learned something new. Which was established to help promote awareness and education about the Nazi genocide around the world. Whoopi Goldberg was wrong, but so are many others about Jews, race, and the Holocaust. Next came stunning remarks from Whoopi Goldberg speaking on The View during about the controversy over Maus. Goldberg said that the Holocaust wasn't about race, it was really about man's inhumanity to man, which she is dead on correct about. Challenged by her co-host, Goldberg insisted that from her perspective, the Holocaust really wasn't about race at all. She only saw white perpetrators and white victims, so how was it about race? So this is her perspective. So, as I said, she was right that ultimately the Holocaust was an example, was about man's inhumanity to man, but she is incorrect in thinking that you can't have racism within a race. You can't have whites being racist against other whites. Ever heard the term white trash? As the grandson of a Holocaust survivor who narrowly escaped Germany before the anti-Semitic Nuremberg racial laws were implemented, Goldberg's comments caused me tremendous confusion and hurt. Those racial laws that forced hundreds of thousands of Jews to wear yellow stars to identify them, racial laws that forced them out of their livelihoods, and racial laws that shunned them into crowded ghettos before they were liquidated and sent to their deaths in concentration camps scattered across Europe. That is true. And don't forget, you also had anti-Italian, anti-Irish sentiment, anti-Asian sentiment that was going on during that time as well. So it wasn't just limited to one particular group. I need to make that clear. I'm not trying to downplay what happened in Nazi Germany to the Jews. It was terrible. It should have never happened. So being somebody of German descent, I don't want to ever see that happen again. And knowing that Hitler also went after fellow Germans, Jehovah's Witnesses, clergymen like I mentioned, no, I don't want to see another Holocaust. And it was racial laws that targeted people who didn't themselves identify as Jews or practice Judaism, that's true, but had parents or grandparents who were Jewish. Anybody who adopted the Jewish faith fell in that category. Here we go. Holocaust denial rising worldwide. And here was Whoopi, literally one of the most visible women in television and one with a devoted following, insisting contrary to all historical evidence that the Holocaust wasn't about race, that it wasn't about the genocide of a people demonized as lesser and subordinate. So that's it. USA Today. This is Jonathan Greenblatt talking about how he is forgiving Whoopi Goldberg, but that she's wrong on what she said. Well, she has a right to her opinion. She can be wrong, but she can still have a right to her opinion. So let's end with this exchange that took place on The View. What was actually said? So I'm just going to read you the tail end of this. I'm doing this with the closed captions, so a transcript, so to speak. Please bear with me because this closed caption on my computer goes pretty quickly, so it may sound a little choppy here. So there are 4 people on the panel. Well, actually, 5. I'm sorry, 5. It's Whoopi Goldberg. You have Joy Behar, Anna Navarro. Is it Anna or Anna Navarro? And 2 other women. I don't know that. One white, one black. I don't know their names. So the white woman with blonde hair, she chimes in and says, this is the confusion that they're creating, I believe. I was going to say colleges. This started in colleges and universities. And it's just taking a moment for this to load up for the next sentence here. Not wanting to make our kids feel uncomfortable. And Van Jones, she talks about how Van Jones talked about this, saying that if I send my kids to school, I want them to push back on their beliefs. Otherwise, we're not preparing kids. We're preparing them for a world that doesn't exist outside of their own house. But the funny thing is, these SJW types, these ultra-leftists, they wanted safe spaces. They don't want to be offended. They want to take down the Confederate battle flag or topple these statues of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, not just Confederate soldiers or generals like Robert E. Lee. They want to take it all down if they could, because of America's original sin, and we can never be forgiven for that. But they're the ones who wanted these safe spaces. But now it's coming back to bite them in the rear end, because they're realizing that you have to talk about these uncomfortable issues if you're going to create a better society. If you're going to think about the greater good. If we're going to do this, this is Whoopi Goldberg chiming in, if we're going to do this, let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race. So I think it's Joy Behar saying it's not about race, and Whoopi Goldberg responds, no, it's not about race. It's about, and someone chimes in and says, it's a different race. It's not about race. It's not about race. That's Whoopi Goldberg. And Joy Behar asks, well, it's not about race. Well, what is it about? It's about man's inhumanity to man. Bingo. Absolutely correct. More so than race, that is at the core of it. Man's inhumanity to man. But it's about white supremacy. This is Anna Navarro responding. But it's not about it. It's not about race. Reading this closed caption here. She says here, Whoopi Goldberg says, well, it's 2 white groups fighting amongst each other. They don't see them as white, though, but you're missing the point. So that was Joy Behar. Now you have Whoopi Goldberg, who's responding back, but you're missing the point. The minute you turn it into race, it goes down this alley. Let's talk about it for what it is. This is important. It's how people treat each other. That's the problem. It doesn't matter if you are black or white, because black, white, Jewish, Italians, everybody eats each other. So is it, if you are uncomfortable, if you hear about Moss, should you be worried? Talking about this book, should your child say, oh my God, I wonder if that's me? No. That's not what they're going to say. They're going to say, I don't want to be like that, hopefully. That was the exchange on The View. And I think that Whoopi Goldberg, in her defense, had a valid point here. I mean, she wasn't totally off base. So go watch this exchange on The View. Go check out these articles. Check out this article about the dictator's son in Ecuador, Ghana, who's spending $116 million of that government's money on fast cars and luxury homes while the people in that country starve. So you got AOC coming out and defending Whoopi Goldberg. You got people tossing around this term or the white supremacy and these statements that Adolf Hitler said about the Jews, that they're an inferior race, when it turns out that in Europe, race is seen equivalent to culture. And at that time, that was, they still hadn't gotten rid of this idea of nationalism. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please click that like button, subscribe, hit me up on Instagram at #JasonComposes, leave comments below. Now you can reach me at Twitter, Culture Confederacy at Twitter. Thanks for being with me. Hope I didn't offend anybody out there. And I hope you all have a great weekend. I will see you next week.